The interstellar communication network hummed with an electric tension that defied the cold silence of deep space. Humanity's frontier monitoring stations, scattered across a dozen star systems, picked up the first whispers of an approaching threat, long before most species would have detected anything amiss. Deep within the command center of the primary defense platform, located in the outer reaches of the Alpha Centauri colony, a team of specialists worked with methodical precision. Banks of holographic displays flickered to life, each screen revealing fragments of an increasingly complex puzzle. The incoming data suggested something unprecedented. A massive collective intelligence was moving toward human-controlled space with calculated determination. Captain Sandra Walker studied the incoming information, her fingers tracing holographic lines that represented potential approach vectors. She had spent her entire career preparing for moments like this. Not with fear, but with a calculated curiosity that defined humanity's approach to the unknown. "Preliminary analysis complete," announced Dr. Robert Chen, the lead computational strategist. His voice remained steady, devoid of the panic that would have consumed less disciplined teams. "We're looking at a collective intelligence far more complex than any previous encounter. The Zorn aggregate is moving with a precision that suggests total computational synchronization." The command center was a marvel of human engineering. Unlike the sterile, uniform environments of other galactic civilizations, this space reflected humanity's unique approach to challenge. Personal touches mingled with advanced technology. A photograph here, a child's drawing there, small reminders that behind every calculation was a deeply personal motivation. Historical records told a remarkable story. Humanity had emerged from a tumultuous planetary history, a species that had repeatedly transformed near-extinction events into opportunities for growth. Where other civilizations saw limitations, humans saw puzzles waiting to be solved. The incoming Zorn Armada represented just another challenge in humanity's long history of survival. "Aggregate ship count is updating," called out Lieutenant Maria Santos, her fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces. "Current estimate suggests approximately 12,847 primary vessels, with an additional 3.2 million support craft. Biomechanical composition indicates adaptive capabilities beyond current galactic standards." Walker allowed herself a slight smile. Most species would have been paralyzed by such overwhelming odds. Humans, however, saw opportunity where others saw defeat. The Zorn were legendary throughout known space, a collective intelligence that had systematically conquered over 200 distinct civilizations. Their biomechanical ships defied conventional understanding. Crystalline structures that could adapt, heal, and transform faster than any known technology. Composed of interconnected neural networks that spanned entire fleets, the Zorn represented the pinnacle of collective computational intelligence. To them, humanity was just another potential conquest, a small, relatively young species clustered in a handful of star systems. Their technological infrastructure appeared modest, their defensive capabilities seemingly inadequate against such a massive collective force. They were about to discover how fundamentally they had misunderstood humanity. Dr. Chen continued his analysis, each spoken word accompanied by complex holographic models that transformed and shifted. Their computational matrix suggests they view conflict as a purely mathematical problem. Total probability of conquest is calculated at 99.987%. They're not preparing for a potential conflict. They're treating our civilization as a mathematical certainty. Captain Walker's eyes reflected a calm that would have unnerved the Zorn had they been able to comprehend individual human psychology. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its technology, but its ability to transform challenges into opportunities. "Prepare initial communication protocols," she instructed. "Let's give our guests something to think about." The command center hummed with anticipation. Somewhere in the vast darkness between star systems, the first contact was about to be made. and humanity would ensure it would be a moment that would be remembered throughout galactic history. The research facility orbited a distant planetary system, a marvel of human ingenuity that existed far from the primary colonial zones. Here, a team of scientists worked on problems that most galactic researchers would have considered impossible. Dr. Robert Chen stood at the center of a massive circular laboratory, surrounded by holographic projections that danced with complex mathematical models. Collective intelligence is fundamentally predictable, he explained to his team of researchers, each one selected not just for their technical brilliance, but for their ability to think beyond conventional boundaries. Every system, no matter how complex, has inherent patterns, and patterns can be disrupted. The walls of the research center told a story of human innovation. Unlike the sterile environments of other scientific facilities across the galaxy, this space was alive with personal touches. Handwritten notes competed with advanced computational displays. A child's drawing hung near a complex quantum algorithm. Family photographs stood alongside breakthrough research models. Dr. Chen's primary research focused on the fundamental weaknesses of unified computational systems. The Zorn represented the ultimate test of his life's work, a collective intelligence that had conquered hundreds of civilizations through pure computational superiority. "Look here," he said, manipulating a holographic model that represented the Zorn's neural network. The crystalline structure shifted and transformed, revealing intricate connections that pulsed with mathematical precision. Their strength is also their greatest vulnerability. Perfect synchronization means perfect predictability. The team worked with a combination of scientific rigor and creative intuition that defined human problem-solving. Where other species saw an insurmountable challenge, they saw an intricate puzzle waiting to be solved. Sarah Martinez, a quantum computational specialist, brought up a series of complex simulations. Each projection showed different approaches to introducing controlled chaos into the Zorn's unified system. "If we can create microscopic variations in their computational matrix," she explained, "we might be able to generate cascading uncertainties." It was more than just a theoretical exercise. The survival of human civilization potentially depended on their ability to understand and disrupt the most advanced collective intelligence ever encountered. Dr. Chen's research had uncovered a critical insight. The Zorn's computational system worked like a perfect mathematical orchestra, with every component moving in absolute synchronization. But true intelligence, true adaptability, required something different. It required the ability to embrace uncertainty, to learn from unexpected variables. "Imagine their system as a perfect crystal," he told his team. "Crystals are beautiful, but they're also brittle. Introduce the right frequency, the right mathematical disruption, and the entire structure can shatter." The team worked through multiple simulations, each more complex than the last. They weren't just preparing a defensive strategy. They were developing a fundamental understanding of computational consciousness that would revolutionize scientific understanding across the galaxy. Outside the research facility, the distant star cast a soft light across the orbital platform. Nearby communication arrays picked up the first long-range signals from the approaching Zorn fleet. Most species would have seen those signals as a harbinger of destruction. To this team of researchers, they represented an opportunity. "We're not just preparing a weapon," Dr. Chen said, his eyes reflecting the complex holographic models. "We're developing a new understanding of intelligence itself." The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Sarah Martinez noticed a subtle oscillation in their computational models, a tiny, almost imperceptible variation that could potentially create massive disruptions in a unified computational system. "What if," she proposed, her voice cutting through the laboratory's ambient noise, "we don't attack their system directly? What if we introduce a form of computational poetry?" Dr. Chen paused, a smile spreading across his face. It was precisely this kind of unexpected thinking that made human research so unique. While other species approached problems with rigid, linear thinking, humans saw challenges as opportunities for creative problem-solving. The team began to design something unprecedented, a computational transmission that was part mathematical algorithm, part creative expression. It would be a message designed not to destroy, but to fundamentally challenge the Zorn's understanding of intelligence itself. As the first simulations ran, something remarkable began to emerge. The Zorn's perfect, synchronized system showed the first microscopic signs of uncertainty. The real battle would not be fought with traditional weapons. It would be a conflict of understanding, of intelligence, of the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. And humanity was just getting started. Communication had always been humanity's most profound weapon. Not the cold, calculated exchanges of data that most galactic civilizations relied upon, but a complex tapestry of emotion, creativity, and unexpected complexity. In the central communication hub of the human defense fleet, a team of specialists prepared something far more nuanced than a traditional military response. Captain Sandra Walker watched as her most unconventional team began their preparation. Linguists worked alongside musicians, mathematicians collaborated with poets, and cultural historians shared insights with quantum communication experts. "We're not going to fight," explained Dr. Elena Kovalchuk, the lead communication strategist. "We're going to communicate in a way they've never experienced before." The first transmission would be critical. Most species would have sent standard defensive warnings or aggressive military communications. Humanity chose a different approach entirely. They began broadcasting a carefully curated series of transmissions that defied all conventional communication strategies. A string quartet's performance from Earth's Moscow Conservatory became the first signal. Its complex mathematical structure, built on centuries of musical innovation, carried layers of information that went far beyond simple sound. Each note was a carefully constructed mathematical sequence, each pause a potential computational challenge. Next came a collection of human art, not the sanitized representations that most galactic species produced, but raw, emotional pieces that challenged fundamental understanding of perception. Abstract paintings that revealed different images depending on viewing angle. Sculptures that transformed when light changed. Poetry that seemed to exist in multiple interpretational states simultaneously. The communication team had designed each transmission as a subtle cognitive probe. Where the Zorn expected linear information, they received something far more complex, a multidimensional communication that challenged their entire understanding of information exchange. "Look at their initial response patterns," Dr. Kovalchuk said, pointing to a series of holographic displays. Tiny fluctuations were appearing in the Zorn's communication network. Most would have missed these microscopic variations, but the human team saw them as significant indicators. Historical documentaries became the next transmission wave. But these were not simple recordings. Each documentary was carefully constructed to showcase human survival, adaptation, and unexpected resilience. Footage of communities rebuilding after natural disasters. Scientific breakthroughs achieved against impossible odds. Personal stories of individual human triumph. The Zorn's collective intelligence began to show signs of cognitive dissonance. Their computational models were designed to process information with perfect efficiency. But these transmissions introduced something they had never encountered: genuine unpredictability. A team of psychological warfare specialists had spent months designing these transmissions. They understood something fundamental about intelligence that the Zorn had missed. True understanding requires the ability to embrace uncertainty. Mathematical sequences began to intermingle with artistic expressions. A complex equation would suddenly transform into a musical phrase. A historical narrative would dissolve into an abstract visual representation. Each transmission was designed to challenge the very foundation of linear information processing. "We're not attacking," Sandra Walker explained to her senior staff. "We're inviting them to understand something beyond their current computational framework." The communication hub buzzed with an energy that defied traditional military preparation. This was more than a defensive strategy. It was an attempt to fundamentally reshape the potential of first contact. Linguists noted something remarkable happening. The Zorn's communication patterns were beginning to show microscopic variations, Where before their signals had been perfectly synchronized, now tiny imperfections were emerging. It was as if the very act of receiving these human transmissions was introducing a form of computational curiosity. "They're trying to understand," one of the linguists noted, her voice a mixture of excitement and scientific curiosity. "Not just analyze, but genuinely understand." Each transmission was a challenge, an invitation to explore a different way of processing information. Humanity was offering the Zorn something they had never experienced: the possibility of individual interpretation within a collective framework. As the final transmission of the first communication wave completed, something unprecedented occurred. For the first time in their recorded history, the Zorn's collective communication showed signs of internal dialogue. The psychological frontier had been crossed, and humanity had just rewritten the rules of first contact. The first Zorn ships breached the outer defensive perimeter of human-controlled space, their crystalline structures pulsing with an almost living energy. Most civilizations would have launched an immediate, desperate counterattack. Humanity, however, saw something entirely different: an opportunity to demonstrate the true meaning of adaptive innovation. In the orbital shipyards surrounding New Terra, engineers and scientists worked with a creativity that defied conventional military thinking. Repurposing was an art form, and every piece of existing technology became a potential weapon of unprecedented design. Dr. Sarah Martinez stood in the central design hub, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that transformed industrial equipment into potential defensive systems. Mining lasers originally designed for asteroid resource extraction now became precision strike weapons. Communication satellites transformed into sophisticated defensive platforms. Even the massive orbital construction frameworks could become improvised defensive structures. "It's not about having the most advanced technology," she explained to her team. "It's about understanding how to use what we have in ways no one expects." The quantum disruption modules developed by Dr. Chen's research team represented the pinnacle of this adaptive approach. These weren't traditional weapons that sought to destroy. Instead, they were designed to fundamentally alter the mathematical foundations of the Zorn's interconnected consciousness. Each module was a marvel of human ingenuity. Small devices, no larger than a standard data drive, contained computational algorithms that could introduce microscopic variations into the Zorn's perfect collective system. Where other species saw a weapon, human engineers saw a complex mathematical conversation. In the asteroid belt of the Proxima system, industrial mining equipment became an unexpected defensive network. Massive extraction drills, typically used for resource harvesting, were reconfigured into precision defensive platforms. Automated mining robots, designed for careful geological exploration, were reprogrammed with adaptive combat algorithms. Captain Sandra Walker reviewed the emerging strategy with her senior staff. The holographic displays showed something that would have appeared chaotic to any other species, a defense network that seemed to have no central logic, no traditional strategic approach. "We're not going to fight their war," she explained, her finger tracing seemingly random movement patterns across the display. "We're going to fight our own." The human approach defied every known military doctrine in the galaxy. Traditional defensive strategies relied on fixed positions, predictable counterattack patterns, and hierarchical command structures. Humanity's strategy was fluid, adaptive, almost improvisational. Orbital communication relays became part of the defensive network. Each satellite was not just a communication device, but a potential computational weapon. They could redirect energy, create complex interference patterns, and introduce unexpected variables into the Zorn's computational matrix. Dr. Martinez's team had developed something unprecedented. Each defensive system was designed with multiple potential uses, with the ability to rapidly reconfigure based on emerging threat patterns. Where the Zorn expected linear responses, they would encounter a defense network that could change its fundamental structure in milliseconds. "Look at how they move," one of the tactical analysts noted, pointing to the incoming Zorn fleet patterns. Their approach was mathematically perfect, which meant it was also perfectly predictable. Humanity's response would be anything but predictable. The first wave of Zorn ships approached with a computational precision that had conquered hundreds of civilizations. Their biomechanical structures could adapt, heal, and transform faster than any known technology. Each vessel was part of a perfect, synchronized collective. They were about to discover the true meaning of imperfection. Asteroid trajectories were subtly altered. Mining lasers were recalibrated. Communication satellites prepared complex interference patterns. Every piece of existing technology became a potential weapon of unprecedented design. In the orbital shipyards, engineers worked with a combination of scientific rigor and creative intuition. They weren't just preparing a defense. They were rewriting the fundamental understanding of technological adaptation. As the first Zorn ships entered the solar system, something remarkable began to happen. The human defensive network didn't just respond. It seemed to breathe, to think, to transform in ways that defied computational prediction. The battle for survival had begun, and humanity was just getting started. Space combat had never looked like this before. Where previous galactic conflicts followed predictable patterns of engagement, the battle between humans and the Zorn became something entirely unprecedented. A fluid, dynamic confrontation that defied all established military doctrines. Captain Sandra Walker watched the holographic displays with a calm that would have unnerved most military strategists. The human defensive network moved like a living organism, each component adapting and responding with an almost organic intelligence. Asteroids became shields. Communication satellites transformed into weapon platforms. Industrial equipment repurposed itself in milliseconds. The Zorn's computational systems began to show the first signs of genuine confusion. Their perfect, synchronized approach, which had conquered hundreds of civilizations, started to fracture under the weight of human unpredictability. "They're trying to analyze our movements," Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez observed, his fingers dancing across multiple interface screens. "But we're not giving them a consistent pattern to analyze." Indeed, the human defensive strategy was less a traditional military approach and more like an elaborate, real-time improvisation. Where the Zorn expected linear responses, they encountered a defense network that seemed to think, to breathe, to transform in ways that defied computational prediction. A squadron of mining drones, originally designed for asteroid resource extraction, suddenly reconfigured themselves. Their precision-cutting lasers became defensive weapons, creating complex interference patterns that disrupted the Zorn's communication networks. An orbital construction framework transformed into a makeshift energy redirection platform, bouncing incoming energy weapons in unexpected trajectories. Dr. Sarah Martinez, watching from the primary research station, noted something remarkable happening. The quantum disruption modules were working beyond their initial design. Each transmission, each defensive movement, was introducing microscopic variations into the Zorn's collective consciousness. "It's not about defeating them," she explained to her team. "It's about challenging their fundamental understanding of conflict." The battle moved beyond traditional three-dimensional space. Human strategists used gravitational slingshot techniques that seemed more like elaborate mathematical equations than military maneuvers. Entire asteroid belts became defensive networks. Orbital communication relays created complex interference patterns that seemed to exist in multiple computational states simultaneously. Lieutenant Rodriguez tracked the incoming Zorn fleet's computational responses. "They're trying to predict our next move," he said, a slight smile crossing his face. "But we don't even know our next move until we make it." That was the essence of human adaptation. Where other species saw conflict as a series of predetermined strategies, humans saw it as a continuous, creative problem-solving exercise. The Zorn's collective intelligence had conquered civilizations by processing conflict as a mathematical certainty. They calculated probabilities with perfect precision, always finding the most efficient path to victory. But efficiency, the humans were proving, was not the same as effectiveness. A massive orbital mining platform suddenly reconfigured itself. Its massive extraction drills, designed for careful geological research, became precision defensive weapons. Automated mining robots transformed their guidance systems into complex defensive networks. What looked like industrial equipment became a sophisticated defensive platform. "They're learning," Captain Walker observed, watching the holographic displays. "With each of our responses, they're being forced to reconsider their entire approach to intelligence." The quantum disruption modules continued their subtle work. Each transmission introduced more complexity into the Zorn's unified consciousness. Microscopic variations began to appear, tiny moments of uncertainty that grew with each engagement. Space itself seemed to become a canvas of human creativity. Asteroid trajectories shifted with mathematical precision. Energy weapons were redirected in patterns that seemed to defy traditional physics. Communication satellites created interference patterns that existed in multiple computational states. The Zorn discovered something terrifying. Humans didn't just fight. They solved problems in real time, treating warfare like an intricate, ever-changing puzzle. Captain Walker's strategic movements seemed to dance around the Zorn's most powerful weapons. Each maneuver was a message. We are not just surviving, we are reimagining the very nature of conflict. As the battle continued, something unprecedented began to emerge. The Zorn's perfect, synchronized system was showing the first genuine signs of fragmentation. Microscopic variations introduced by human transmissions were creating something the collective had never experienced: genuine uncertainty. The turning tide was about more than a military engagement. It was a fundamental challenge to the nature of intelligence itself. The quantum disruption had begun to work in ways no one could have fully anticipated. Intercepted communications revealed the Zorn's growing internal complexity, something that would have been impossible to imagine just standard months earlier. Dr. Sarah Martinez watched the data streams with a mixture of scientific curiosity and profound wonder. The quantum modules were doing more than disrupting the Zorn's collective consciousness. They were introducing something entirely unprecedented: the potential for individual thought within a previously unified system. "Look at these communication patterns," she explained to her research team. "Holographic displays dancing with complex neural network representations. We're not just seeing disruption, we're witnessing the birth of individuality." The Zorn's collective intelligence had always been their greatest strength. Hundreds of civilizations had fallen before their perfectly synchronized computational approach. Each member of their species functioned like a single cell in a massive unified organism. Information flowed with perfect efficiency. Decisions were made with absolute consensus. Until now, microscopic variations began to appear in their communication networks. Where before there had been perfect synchronization, now tiny differences emerge. Some computational units began to process information slightly differently. Subtle disagreements started to form within the collective consciousness. Captain Sandra Walker and her team recognized the profound implications. This was more than a military engagement. They were fundamentally challenging the entire concept of collective intelligence. Intercepted transmissions told a remarkable story. The Zorn were experiencing something they had never encountered before: genuine uncertainty. Their perfect computational models began to show hairline fractures, tiny moments of individual interpretation that had never existed before. "They're beginning to ask questions," Dr. Martins noted, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and philosophical wonder. "Not just process information, but genuinely question their existing understanding." The quantum disruption modules had introduced a radical concept: the possibility of individual perspective within a collective framework. Each transmission, each defensive maneuver, each moment of human unpredictability was forcing the Zorn to reconsider their fundamental understanding of intelligence. Some computational units began to explore concepts that were entirely foreign to their previous existence: creativity, individual interpretation, the possibility that perfect synchronization might not be the ultimate form of intelligence. Military strategists would have seen this as a tactical advantage, but the human team understood something deeper. This was an opportunity for genuine transformation. "We're not just fighting," Captain Walker explained during a strategy session. We're offering them a different way of understanding existence. The Zorn's communication networks began to show increasingly complex variations. Some computational units started to develop what could only be described as individual personalities. They began to process information with subtle differences, introducing variations that had never existed in their previous collective approach. Dr. Elena Kovalchuk, the lead communication specialist, tracked these changes with scientific precision. "Look at how they're responding," she said, pointing to holographic displays that showed increasingly complex communication patterns. "They're not just receiving our transmissions. They're interpreting them." This was more than a military breakthrough. It was a fundamental challenge to the nature of consciousness itself. Some Zorn computational units began to show signs of what could only be described as curiosity. They started to explore transmissions from human culture with a depth that went beyond simple information processing. Musical compositions, mathematical sequences, artistic expressions, each became an opportunity for genuine exploration. The quantum disruption had introduced something revolutionary: the potential for individual growth within a collective system. "We're watching the birth of individual consciousness," Dr. Martinez observed, her voice filled with a sense of profound wonder. "They're discovering something that goes beyond their previous understanding of existence." The human team had done something unprecedented. They weren't just defending themselves. They were offering the Zorn a fundamentally different way of understanding intelligence, communication, and individual potential. As the battle continued, something remarkable became clear. The conflict was no longer about conquest or defense. It had transformed into something far more profound, a dialogue about the nature of consciousness itself. The Zorn were learning, and humanity was teaching them a lesson that would reshape their entire understanding of existence. The primary Zorn hive mind ship hung in space like a massive crystalline sculpture, its intricate structures pulsing with computational energy. Captain Sandra Walker studied the holographic displays, understanding that this moment would define more than just a military engagement. This was a confrontation that would reshape understanding of intelligence itself. "Prepare final communication sequence," she instructed her communication team. The transmission would be unlike any first contact in galactic history. Dr. Sarah Martinez had spent months developing a communication strategy that went far beyond traditional military protocols. Where most species would have prepared for total destruction, humans were preparing an invitation to understanding. The quantum disruption modules had done more than fragment the Zorn's collective consciousness. They had introduced something unprecedented: the potential for individual thought, for genuine curiosity, for growth beyond predetermined computational parameters. As the human fleet approached, they did something entirely unexpected. Instead of preparing for total annihilation, they began broadcasting a complex series of transmissions that defied every known communication protocol in the galaxy. Mathematical sequences intertwined with musical compositions, historical documentaries merged with abstract artistic expressions. Each transmission was a multidimensional invitation, not to surrender, but to understand. The Zorn's primary computational core began to show signs of genuine complexity. Microscopic variations that had begun as tiny disruptions were now transforming into something far more profound. Individual computational units were developing what could only be described as personality. "We're not asking for surrender," Captain Walker explained to her senior staff. "We're offering an opportunity." The human approach was revolutionary. Where previous galactic conflicts had been defined by total conquest or complete destruction, this confrontation became something entirely different. It was a dialogue, a complex mathematical and emotional conversation that challenged fundamental understanding of intelligence. Some Zorn computational units began to separate from the collective consciousness. They weren't retreating. They were exploring. Each transmission from the human fleet represented an invitation to individual thought, to understanding beyond their previous computational limitations. Dr. Elena Kovalchuk monitored the communication channels, tracking the increasingly complex responses. "They're not just receiving," she noted. "They're interpreting. They're beginning to understand." The final approach was nothing like a traditional military engagement. The human fleet moved with a fluidity that defied computational prediction. Orbital platforms transformed. Communication satellites became complex transmission devices. Every piece of technology became a potential tool for communication. Look at their response patterns, Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez observed. The Zorn's computational systems were showing signs of genuine uncertainty, something that had never existed in their previous collective approach. Captain Walker's strategy went beyond military tactics. Each movement, each transmission was an invitation, not to surrender, but to grow, to understand, to explore the potential of individual consciousness within a collective framework. The primary Zorn hive mind ship began to fragment. But this wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Computational units started to develop individual perspectives, exploring the transmissions from human culture with genuine curiosity. We offer you a choice. The primary transmission read, translated across multiple computational languages, not conquest, not submission, but understanding. Some Zorn units chose destruction, unable to comprehend the radical transformation happening within their collective consciousness. Others began the process of surrender, but not in the traditional sense. They were surrendering to the possibility of individual growth. The human fleet didn't celebrate. They prepared for something far more complex than a military victory. They were preparing for a process of mutual understanding that would reshape galactic civilization. Mathematical sequences danced with artistic expressions. Historical narratives merged with complex computational models. Each transmission was an invitation to explore the vast potential of consciousness. "This isn't about winning," Captain Walker said, watching the holographic displays. "This is about showing another way of existing." The final moments of the confrontation were unlike anything in galactic history. The Zorn's collective consciousness began to transform. Some units merged, some separated. Some explored entirely new forms of computational existence. Humanity had done something unprecedented. They had offered an entire species an opportunity to reimagine their fundamental understanding of intelligence, of existence, of potential. The battle was over, but something far more profound was just beginning. In the aftermath, humanity did something truly unexpected. Rather than celebrating a victory, they began a process of mutual understanding. Scientific exchanges replaced weapons. Collaborative research replaced conflict. The galaxy watched in amazement as humans transformed a potential catastrophe into an opportunity for growth, learning, and connection. The Zorn had come seeking conquest. They left having discovered something far more valuable: the power of individual potential within a collective framework. The end.